Good morning, class. Today, by the way, my name is Someleze Makubalo. Today I'll be talking to you about human reproduction. That word on its own, I think it explains itself. It's a reproduction in humans. So if you want to talk about human reproduction, you have to have a female and a male. There will never be production without those two. So now I want to deal with the female reproduction. What happens in females in order for reproduction to take place? Or how do we prepare for a reproduction on the female side in order for reproduction to take place? So I'll start to talk to you about this is a structure that represent a female and all the processes that take place within the female during the preparation of a reproduction. So now I'll talk to you about the ovaries. So these are ovaries. This place we call it ovaries. Where do we find ovaries? We find them in the female reproduction system. So if you look at the reproduction system of a female, this is it's a primary organ that we need in the reproduction of females. I normally say this is a reproduction place. You know, if you are having a company and they are producing products, this is where everything is produced. In order for us to even talk about a child being born, a pregnancy taking place, everything begins here. The maintenance of that pregnancy, everything starts here. So I will talk to you about ovaries and what are the functions of ovaries. Basically, this is like a bag, a container. Inside the ovaries, we find what? We find there is invisible follicle. There is invisible follicle inside the ovaries, and that invisible follicle, it must be stimulated. And then after it has been stimulated, you will have an ovum that grows inside that that follicle. So let's do this. So this is what we call what? A follicle. A follicle. So there are hormones that are involved in this whole process. If we want to talk about female reproduction, there are hormones that we cannot afford not to talk about. So inside the ovaries, we have a follicle. And how do we get that follicle? There is a hormone called FSH, a follicle stimulating hormone. That follicle stimulates this follicle. Remember, it's a follicle stimulating hormone. Therefore, it is the one that caused the emergence of what? Of this follicle. Once this follicle surfaces or is stimulated, then within that follicle there will be a growth of what? Of ovum. There will be growth of ovum. An ovum is a what? Is an egg. So if you talk about ovum, basically you are talking about egg. So there will be growth of egg inside the graphian, inside the follicle. But now this follicle, it matures. So when this follicle has matured, we call it what? Graphian follicle. Graphian follicle. What is a graphian follicle? The graphian follicle is a matured follicle. How did we even have that follicle from the beginning? We had that follicle because of follicle stimulating hormone. So follicle stimulating hormone, it gives rise to what? To a follicle. And then within that follicle, we have an ovum, an egg that is growing inside the follicle. But all that process is happening within the what? The ovary. So we have the ovary, and then within the ovary, FSH stimulates a follicle, and then when that follicle is stimulated, within that follicle, we then have an ovum, and that ovum is growing. As that ovum grows, also the follicle is also growing. Then we end up having what? A matured follicle, which is called graphian follicle. When it is not matured, we just call it follicle. Once it matures, it tends to be what? A graphian follicle. Now, I need to introduce another hormone. That hormone, we call it what? Luteinizing hormone, LH. Now, remember, this follicle, when it has matured, once it matures, it is ready to what? To burst. But why does it have to burst? This egg that is growing inside the follicle, it must be released to where? It must be released to the fallopian tubes. This area, we call it what? Fallopian tube. Fallopian tube. What is the fallopian tube? Fallopian tubes, I will call them tubes because we have them on the right and also on the left. What are fallopian tubes? Fallopian tubes are what? A site of fertilization. A site of fertilization. So basically, this is where fertilization takes place. This is where the infusion of the egg and the sperm take place. This is where the sperm infuse the egg. So fallopian tubes are a site of fertilization. But how does the egg move to the fallopian tubes? That's what I'm going to explain to you now. So now, remember we have a Graafian follicle. Then now, when that Graafian follicle has matured, it opens up. The ovum comes out. The Graafian follicle bursts. Graafian follicle burst. So luteinizing hormone is responsible for what? For bursting the Graafian follicle. I'll just say GF. The GF, which is Graafian follicle. Then the egg moves up to what? To the, I'll say FT, to the fallopian tubes. Then once the egg moves to the fallopian tube, which is a site of fertilization, the egg is now waiting for what? Is waiting for sperm to come in. Now let's assume that copulation takes place and then the egg goes in, swims inside the woman. It swims to the what? To the fallopian tubes. Once the the sperm swims to the fallopian tubes and meets the egg, then fertilization takes place. Then once the egg and the sperm meet, we call that what? Fertilization. Fertilization. So fertilization takes place on the fallopian tubes. Thank you, class.